Agent Harper moved with deliberate precision across the dusty desert terrain, the low sun casting long shadows over the cracked earth. Every movement was calculated, every sound registered in her mind. Her mission had seemed straightforward: gather intelligence on a small insurgent cell operating along the border, intercept a weapons shipment, and extract without detection. But Harper had learned long ago that even the most routine operations could spiral into chaos. She adjusted her night vision goggles and tightened the straps on her gear, listening intently for the faint rustle of movement. The wind carried the scent of sand and dust, but it also carried the potential for danger footsteps that didn't belong, whispers that weren't meant for her ears. She crouched behind a large, jagged rock formation, eyes scanning the horizon. At first glance, the desert seemed empty, but Harper knew better. Every shadow could conceal a threat. Her hand hovered near her sidearm, and her fingers itched with readiness. One wrong step, one faint sound, and everything could collapse. She breathed slowly, deliberately, controlling her adrenaline. Her training had drilled this exact scenario into her muscle memory. She wasn't just a soldier. She was a hunter, a tactician, a mind conditioned to anticipate threats and respond instantly. Then, without warning, the silence shattered. A series of rapid footsteps, accompanied by hushed voices, approached from her right flank. Harper froze, heart hammering, body rigid. She considered retreat, but there was no time. They had spotted her. The ambush was precise, swift, and merciless. Shadows surged from the dunes, men armed and masked, cutting off every potential escape route. Harper's instincts screamed at her to move, but she had trained for situations like this. She ducked low, rolled into cover behind another rock, and assessed the attackers. Guns raised, they moved like predators who had found their prey. Harper's mind raced through options: fight, flee, negotiate, but none seemed viable in the open desert, with multiple armed assailants. Before she could react, a rough hand seized her shoulder, yanking her backward. The movement was sudden, violent, and disorienting. Harper struggled, but the grips were unyielding. They shoved her forward, blindfolding her with a coarse cloth. The desert sun disappeared, replaced by darkness, but the sounds remained. Footsteps, whispers, distant engine hums. She tried to resist, but several men restrained her arms and legs, forcing her to the ground. Harper's pulse surged, not from fear, but from the need to assess, adapt, and survive. The situation was dire, but Harper's mind thrived under pressure. Panic would have been fatal. Calculation was her weapon. The captors hauled her into a waiting vehicle, jostling her violently against metal frames. She could hear the shifting of cargo, the engine's growl, and the distant wind rushing past. Every detail mattered: the number of vehicles, their positions, the cadence of their movement. Harper made mental notes, cataloging everything for potential use later. Even in restraints, even blinded, she was never powerless. They underestimated her, and that would be their greatest mistake. She allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smirk, feeling the thrill of challenge surge through her veins. Hours passed, or was it minutes? Time blurred in the dark, confined space. Every jolt of the vehicle, every shift in weight, told Harper more about her captors' tactics. They were professional, trained, confident, yet arrogant. That arrogance would become her advantage. She listened to snippets of conversation, noting names, accents, and ranks. They believed she was terrified, broken, compliant. But Harper knew better. The moment she had trained for, the moment she had envisioned countless times during simulations, was approaching. Every captured agent she had studied, every escape she had read about, fed her mental strategy. She was not merely enduring. She was preparing. Finally, the vehicle stopped. The sound of doors opening, boots hitting metal, and the hiss of air breaking the vacuum of the cabin signaled arrival. Harper was dragged out, stumbling only slightly to maintain the pretense of weakness. The desert wind hit her face, gritty and biting, but she remained silent. Her captors spoke briefly in hushed tones, then ushered her toward a structure, an abandoned compound fortified with barbed wire and watchtowers. It smelled of dust, sweat, and despair. The captors laughed quietly among themselves, confident in their control, unaware that the agent they had bound and blinded was already planning her counterstrike. She was thrust into a dark, narrow cell. The door slammed, echoing like a gunshot. Harper landed on the cold concrete floor, her wrists chafed, but her resolve unbroken. The blindfold was removed, and her eyes adjusted to dim light filtering through high, barred windows. She assessed the room: sparse furnishings, a single metal cot, an empty sink, and surveillance cameras that tracked movement. A small, barred opening near the ceiling hinted at ventilation, and her trained eyes cataloged potential escape routes. Each observation was fuel, each limitation a challenge to overcome. Footsteps approached. A guard entered, keys jingling, and delivered minimal sustenance. He sneered, muttering insults, assuming psychological dominance. Harper said nothing, letting him believe he had broken her spirit. Every insult, every threat, every taunt was noted for later use. The guard left, and silence returned, heavy and oppressive. Harper's breathing slowed. She replayed the events in her mind, analyzing each moment. The ambush, the capture, the transit, the cell, each had vulnerabilities. Each presented an opportunity. She was no longer merely a prisoner. She was a strategist trapped on hostile terrain, preparing to strike. Night fell. Harper listened to the compound settle into routine. Shifts changed, doors opened and closed, voices echoed through corridors. Every sound painted a mental map. She allowed herself a brief reflection. Fear existed, but it was a tool, not a master. Her training had instilled resilience, mental clarity, and the ability to turn weakness into strength. She ran through possibilities, rehearsing actions, visualizing control of her environment, calculating probabilities of each potential move. This wasn't about escape, yet it was about understanding, preparation, and observation. They thought they had her, but she had them. Hours stretched into an oppressive haze. Harper meditated silently, focusing on breath, heartbeat, and the rhythm of guards' movements. She cataloged every piece of intelligence: the guard rotations, the camera angles, the location of weapons, the power switches. Slowly, patterns emerged. She saw gaps in surveillance, weak points in security, and the arrogance in the pilot's attitude who frequented the pad. That arrogance was a vulnerability she could exploit. Harper's mind, sharpened by years of training and battlefield experience, transformed the confines of her prison into a mental playground. Every limitation became a clue, every restriction a potential advantage. By dawn, Harper had a plan taking shape, intricate yet achievable. It required patience, courage, and precision. She would wait for a moment of opportunity, then act with calculated force. Her captors believed they had neutralized her threat. In their overconfidence, they overlooked the one factor they could never control: her mind. Harper allowed herself a small smile. The hunt had just begun. They saw a prisoner. She saw a battlefield. They thought she was powerless. She was ready. Every shadow, every whisper, every heartbeat was now aligned with her purpose. And soon they would regret underestimating her. Harper's first full day inside the compound began with the same oppressive routine: a narrow corridor, cold concrete floors, and guards who assumed dominance merely by presence. Yet to Harper, every repetition, every casual glance, and every muffled conversation was intelligence. She observed silently, cataloging behavior, learning names, accents, temperaments, and moods. Every small gesture, an exhaled breath, a shrug, a laugh was stored in her mind like a data point in an ever-growing map of human behavior. She noted which guards were vigilant, which were careless, which were predictable, and which were susceptible to manipulation. Her captors had assumed fear would dominate her mind. Instead, she sharpened her senses, letting each movement and sound guide her plan. The pilot of the compound's lone helicopter fascinated her immediately. He moved with casual arrogance, confident in his position and dismissive of prisoners. His uniform was immaculate, hands always steady, eyes scanning the horizon with routine precision. Harper had memorized his walk, the subtle tilt of his head when he was suspicious, the cadence of his footsteps, even the timing of his cigarette. Breaks. To the casual observer, he was merely another enemy soldier, but to Harper, he was a critical piece of her eventual escape plan. Every overconfident smirk and careless gesture was a crack in the wall of their authority, a vulnerability she intended to exploit. During meals, Harper allowed herself to appear weary, broken even, as her captors expected. She didn't argue, didn't resist, and occasionally flinched at harsh words. It was theater, a calculated performance. Behind the facade, her mind raced. The placement of cameras, the sound of distant engines, the exact time when guards rotated shifts. She memorized the locks on her cell, the angles of the lights, and the small supply of tools in the compound's storage closet. Each piece of data was a thread in a web she was slowly spinning, one designed to ensnare her captors at the perfect moment. At night, Harper would lie awake, listening. The hum of the ventilation system, the metallic scrape of boots on concrete, whispers in hallways, each sound became a coordinate in her mental map of the compound. Occasionally, the pilot would enter, checking maintenance schedules or inspecting landing pads. She paid attention to every knob, lever, and switch he interacted with, silently memorizing the helicopter's controls from observation. These fleeting moments of exposure, which the pilot considered mundane, were invaluable. Every detail was stored meticulously: how the rotor engaged, how he started the engines, the position of safety switches, the protocol for liftoff. Her future relied on exploiting these small, seemingly inconsequential moments. Harper's captors remained confident, joking about their easy catch in front of each other. They underestimated her, believing her exhaustion or stoicism reflected fear and hopelessness. Harper smiled inwardly at their arrogance. The more comfortable they became, the more errors they introduced. She noticed subtle signs: the pilot leaving, the hangar unsecured, guards chatting near weapons without supervision, cameras occasionally left unmanned. Harper filed each anomaly away for later use. She rehearsed the potential ways to manipulate them, predicting reactions and planning contingencies. Her mind was a chessboard, the guards and soldiers' pieces, the helicopter the king she would soon control. Observation alone was not enough. Harper knew she needed deception to create openings. She began small, almost imperceptible acts. She pretended confusion over instructions, stumbled slightly while walking, feigned fatigue at mealtimes, and reacted with exaggerated fear to minor threats. Each act reinforced the enemy's assumptions. She was broken, helpless, and easy to manipulate. But behind the mask, she tested responses, noting which guards were aggressive, which were dismissive, and which could be tricked into overextending themselves. Every interaction was a rehearsal for a real-life play, one where she would control the stage entirely. She started experimenting with distractions, subtle at first. A spilled drink, a door left slightly ajar, or a whispered complaint about hunger. All small, calculated moves designed to test attention spans. Guards occasionally reacted with irritation, sometimes ignoring her altogether, and Harper noted these behaviors. The pilot's overconfidence became more pronounced with each passing day, as he laughed at her supposed vulnerability. Harper cataloged every joke, every casual glance, every assumption he made about her. The arrogance of the enemy was a weapon in itself, one she intended to wield decisively. One evening, Harper noticed a pattern. A particular guard always lingered near her cell during the evening shift, seemingly to intimidate, but his eyes wandered frequently toward the helicopter hangar. This guard was careless, predictable, and more importantly, unaware of the importance of his vigilance. Harper began to focus on him, creating small diversions to exploit his wandering attention. She dropped items purposefully, misaligned her, binding slightly, feigned sickness or distress. Each test reinforced her observations. A guard could be manipulated without exposing her. Every small success built her confidence, laying the groundwork for the larger operation that would soon follow. Beyond manipulation of guards, Harper also studied the physical environment. She measured distances in her mind, noted the texture and sound of floors, the weak points in fencing, and the angles of security cameras. Small ventilation shafts, loose floorboards, and maintenance hatches were cataloged as potential escape routes. Her training allowed her to visualize the compound in 3 dimensions, simulating movement, timing, and evasion techniques mentally. She rehearsed escape scenarios during the quiet hours of night, imagining the helicopter's rotor spinning, engines igniting, and the pilot's surprise at being overpowered. Every scenario was analyzed for potential risks and rewards. Harper also considered psychological manipulation. Guards had egos, and she intended to exploit them. Flattery, feigned helplessness, and controlled fear became tools in her arsenal. When she answered questions, she used words carefully, sometimes misleading subtly, without appearing defiant. She learned which captors were arrogant, which were impatient, and which were easily deceived. Each interaction was a test, and Harper passed each one, gathering vital intelligence while maintaining the illusion of powerlessness. By the end of the second week, she had a comprehensive understanding of personnel behavior, patrol patterns, and environmental vulnerabilities. Pilot remained the key to her plan. Harper knew that seizing the helicopter required both technical knowledge and timing. She reviewed every detail she had observed: engine startup sequences, lever positions, throttle response, and rotor controls. Each step was memorized and rehearsed. Mentally, she also considered contingencies: guards arriving unexpectedly, communications jamming, or mechanical failure. Her mind ran simulations constantly, evaluating every potential variable. By combining observation with deception, she ensured that the moment to act would be precise and decisive. Every guard's assumption that she was helpless reinforced the opportunity she would seize. Harper's mental discipline was paramount. She balanced patience with urgency, understanding that acting too soon could be fatal, yet delaying indefinitely risked losing the advantage. She began marking key events: patrol rotations, helicopter maintenance, pilot presence, on an internal timeline. She tracked patterns and deviations, noting environmental factors like sunlight, wind, and ambient noise. These factors would inform the moment she finally took action. In her mind, she ran through dozens of scenarios, each one a rehearsal, for the pivotal moment when she would transform from prisoner to predator. Every day brought her closer to control. Gradually, Harper also began to understand the limits of her deception. Overplaying fear could raise suspicion. Underplaying it could invite aggression. She calibrated her performance carefully, letting the guards perceive weakness while remaining mentally unbreakable. She observed reactions to small provocations, adjusting her behavior to maximize confusion and minimize risk. Every guard, every soldier, Every routine was a variable in her calculations. Even the smallest slip from an enemy became an opportunity. Harper's captivity was no longer merely a challenge. It was a testing ground, a proving ground for her ingenuity, patience, and resolve. She was alive, aware, and ready. As the third week approached, Harper's plan began to solidify. Observation and deception had revealed every critical weakness in the compound's operations. The guards were predictable, the pilot arrogant, and the environment rife with exploitable gaps. Her escape would require combining all these elements into a synchronized, precise action. She imagined the helicopter lifting off, the pilot's surprise, and the chaos that would unfold below. Every minute she remained in the cell was another moment to refine her strategy, to predict, to anticipate. Her captors believed she was powerless. She knew she was primed for action. The hunter within was awake, patient, and relentless. Harper closed her eyes at night, listening to the compound settle. The rhythm of guards, the hum of lights, the faint mechanical sounds all composed a symphony of opportunity. Each detail, each nuance, became a building block for her escape. Her mind, sharpened by years of training and battlefield experience, wove together intelligence, timing, and deception into a cohesive strategy. She felt a quiet satisfaction. Her captors' arrogance, their underestimation, and their rigid routines were all advantages waiting to be exploited. Harper's captivity had become her laboratory, her battlefield, and soon it would be the stage for a transformation that no enemy could anticipate. Weeks had passed, and Harper had become a silent observer, invisible yet hyper-aware, absorbing every detail of the compound, its personnel, and the helicopter that would become her instrument of liberation. The cell, which once felt like a prison, had transformed in her mind into a training ground. Each routine, each patrol rotation, each idle glance of a guard was logged, analyzed, and incorporated into a mental map that now extended far beyond the walls that confined her. Harper had a plan, one that relied not on brute force alone, but on patience, precision, and the enemy's own overconfidence. She began by rehearsing her movements in her mind. Every step from her cell to the helicopter had to be flawless. She considered every obstacle, locked doors, guards' line of sight, cameras, and potential alarms. Every failure had consequences, and there would be no second chance. Her mind ran through simulations, each scenario tested against her observations, and every potential deviation. When she envisioned the final sequence, the moment she would take control of the helicopter, it was as if she were already seated in the cockpit, feeling the vibration of the engines, the whirring of the rotor, and the panic in the faces of those who had underestimated her. Harper also considered psychological manipulation as part of her strategy. She recognized that the guards' and pilots' arrogance could be exploited, not just physically but mentally. Over the past weeks, she had subtly reinforced their assumptions. She was weak, compliant, and easily intimidated. Every flinch, every forced groan, every feigned moment of hesitation was carefully choreographed. These performances were as crucial as memorizing the helicopter controls or studying the compound's patrol patterns. The enemy believed she was powerless. That belief was the key to turning their confidence into chaos. She focused on the helicopter next, observing it with meticulous attention. During brief, allowed glimpses. Every lever, every switch, every indicator panel was noted in detail. Harper memorized the sequence for starting the engines, the position of the rotors, and the critical safety mechanisms. She cataloged potential mechanical issues, noting which parts were most likely to fail under stress and how she could compensate. This was not simply a plan for escape. It was a plan to seize a powerful asset and turn it against her captors. Her mind traced paths, imagined obstacles, and anticipated reactions, forming a blueprint that combined skill, cunning, and audacity. Timing, Harper realized, would be everything. Acting too soon would lead to capture. Waiting too long risked unforeseen variables. She observed shifts, noting which guards were vigilant and which were distracted, which soldiers were predictable and which were prone to panic. She created a mental timeline, marking crucial moments when the probability of success was highest. Each day she refined this timeline, adjusting for minor deviations in guard behavior or environmental conditions. She rehearsed her responses to unexpected events, from sudden patrols to alarms, ensuring that every contingency had a calculated solution. In her mind, the plan became a precise sequence of synchronized actions. Harper's mental rehearsal extended beyond mechanics and personnel. She studied environmental factors, light levels at different times, shadows cast by buildings and towers, wind patterns that might affect rotor lift. She imagined the helicopter navigating narrow corridors, evading enemy fire, and maneuvering over rugged terrain. Every scenario was scrutinized, every possible reaction of the enemy simulated. Harper knew the helicopter was more than a vehicle. It was both shield and weapon. Control of it would symbolize a complete reversal of power, turning the hunters into the hunted. This was not simply escape. It was transformation. Physical preparation was equally vital. Harper practiced subtle movements in her cell, simulating unlocking bindings, slipping through doors, and climbing over obstacles. Small exercises, repeated endlessly, honed her reflexes, strengthened her grip, and trained her muscles for the yell. Split-second demands of the plan. Every twist, turn, and lift was imagined and rehearsed until instinct replaced conscious thought. She combined mental and physical readiness into a seamless unity, the body executing perfectly what the mind had anticipated. Harper's captivity became a crucible, refining both body and intellect for the moment she would seize control. Deception continued to play a critical role. Harper perfected her persona as the compliant, fearful prisoner, allowing guards to underestimate her capabilities at every opportunity. She feigned exhaustion during patrols, stumbled when handled roughly, and made small errors when prompted, all to reinforce the illusion. The pilot, in particular, became increasingly dismissive, assuming her inattention meant weakness. Harper's mind recorded every smirk, every laugh, and every glance away from the controls. These would become critical vulnerabilities to exploit when the plan reached its decisive moment. Psychological warfare, combined with meticulous observation, ensured that the element of surprise would be absolute. Harper also prepared for worst-case scenarios. She identified multiple alternative routes, secondary escape points, and fallback plans. Every window of opportunity had a contingency. Every movement had a countermeasure for potential threats. She considered weapon access, potential injuries, and enemy reinforcements. Nothing was left to chance. Her mind operated as a matrix of variables, each influencing the other, constantly recalculating the optimal path. This meticulous preparation ensured that when the time came to act, she would move with confidence, precision, and control. Harper's plan was no longer theoretical. It was executable, and success was within reach. Beyond mechanics and strategy, Harper contemplated timing relative to her captor's psychology. Fatigue, overconfidence, and routine complacency would be her allies. Guards rotated predictably, rituals followed a rigid schedule, and minor mistakes became predictable. Harper plotted her actions around these patterns, waiting for a moment. When the pilot's attention wavered, when guards were distracted, and when the environment favored her maneuvers. The plan was surgical, exploiting not brute force, but intelligence and foresight. Harper had transformed the limitations of her captivity into a framework for dominance, calculating risk with the precision of a seasoned strategist. As Harper's mental map solidified, she visualized the execution in minute detail. She imagined slipping through the corridors, incapacitating key guards silently, and reaching the helicopter. The tactile feel of the controls, the hum of engines, and the lift of the rotor were rehearsed repeatedly in her mind. She anticipated the panic of the pilot, the confusion among the guards, and the exhilaration of regaining control. Each imagined scenario added layers of precision and confidence. Harper's mind became the cockpit. Her observations were the instruments. The plan, rehearsed countless times, now felt inevitable, and the moment of action drew ever closer. Harper also studied interpersonal dynamics. She knew which guards were likely to react violently, and which would freeze under pressure. She noted alliances, rivalries, and ego vulnerabilities. Each interaction became a potential tool to manipulate, distract, or mislead. A pilot's dismissive attitude, born of arrogance, was particularly exploitable. By feigning weakness, she baited overconfidence, creating the perfect psychological trap. When combined with her technical knowledge and physical readiness, these manipulations ensured that her captors would unwittingly facilitate their own undoing. Harper's understanding of human behavior complemented her strategic planning, creating a synergy between intellect, observation, and action. As the third week progressed, Harper's plan was nearly complete. Observation, deception, environmental analysis, psychological insight, and tactical preparation converged into a single coherent strategy. She had rehearsed the timing, predicted reactions, and memorized every step necessary for success. Every guard misstep, every overconfident smirk, every slight distraction became a component in the larger operation. Harper's captivity, once a threat, had become an incubator for ingenuity and precision. She understood that execution would require courage, composure, and adaptability. But with the foundation she had built, the probability of success was overwhelmingly in her favor. Finally, Harper allowed herself brief moments of reflection. The audacity of her plan, the meticulous preparation, and the reliance on intellect over brute strength filled her with quiet satisfaction. She had transformed fear into opportunity, weakness into strategy, and captivity into a framework for triumph. Her mind traced the final sequence once more, slipping past the guards, incapacitating key personnel, taking control of the helicopter, and turning the tables on her captors. Every detail had been considered, every variable accounted for. Harper's plan was no longer a possibility. It was inevitability waiting for its moment to strike. And in the shadows of the compound, the enemy remained unaware. They believed their prisoner powerless, predictable, and broken. But Harper was ready, and when the moment arrived, she would prove that even in captivity, control could be seized, and the hunter would become unstoppable. The day Harper had been preparing for arrived with quiet inevitability. She woke before dawn, the dim light creeping through the high, barred windows of her cell, casting long shadows across the cold concrete floor. Every sound, the distant hum of engines, the scrape of boots in hallways, the faint whirring of cameras, was catalogued and measured in her mind. Harper's pulse was steady, her breathing controlled. This was no longer preparation. It was execution. Every observation, every calculated deception, every rehearsed move would converge in a precise sequence. The first strike would set the stage for everything that followed. She waited, motionless, while the guards moved about their morning routines. One approached her cell with the usual disdain, tossing her breakfast with careless hands. Harper let the tray clatter to the floor, flinching as if startled, drawing attention to her vulnerability. The guard sneered, speaking in a tone meant to intimidate. Harper responded with a quiet, trembling voice, carefully maintaining the illusion of fear. This small performance was vital. While the guard believed he had subdued her mentally, Harper's mind raced through the final steps of her escape plan, recalculating each variable, refining timing, and anticipating reactions. As the guard stepped closer to adjust her bindings, Harper acted. She twisted her wrist, leveraging his momentary overconfidence against him. Her movements were precise, rehearsed countless times in the confines of her cell. She seized his arm, using his momentum to knock him off balance and bring him to the floor with a controlled force that caused no lasting injury, but incapacitated him immediately. Harper moved swiftly, slipping past the other guards in the hallway. Her presence was silent, her shadow blending with the early morning darkness. Every step was a calculated risk, every breath measured. She had rehearsed this moment countless times, and now it was real. The corridor stretched ahead, empty, but for the patrols she had memorized. Harper crouched low, moving like a whisper through the shadows. She observed the first guard rotation and timed her movements perfectly, slipping behind pillars, pressing against walls, and avoiding any sound that might betray her. Each footstep was synchronized with distant noises, engine hums, clattering, doors to mask her presence. The first strike was not just physical, it was psychological. Harper knew that panic, confusion, and hesitation among the enemy would amplify her advantage. Her captors believed they had control, but in this moment, the balance of power was shifting. She reached the first locked door, separating her from the courtyard and the helicopter pad. Harper studied the lock carefully, recalling the subtle weaknesses she had observed for weeks. With deft fingers, she manipulated the mechanism, bypassing it silently. The door clicked open, and she slipped into the open air of the compound. The morning wind hit her face, salty and dry, but she did not pause. Every detail mattered. The positions of the guards, the orientation of vehicles, the shadow of the helicopter looming above. Harper's mind calculated paths of least resistance, anticipated patrol corrections, and plotted a route that minimized exposure. The courtyard was tense with movement. Soldiers were beginning to assemble for morning duties, their routines predictable, their attention divided. Harper froze, crouched behind a stack of crates, observing the nearest guards. One approached the helicopter hangar, tools in hand, checking the maintenance schedule. Harper noted the timing, how long it would take him to return, where he would be distracted, the angles from which she could approach the helicopter. Every second counted. She allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. Months of preparation had led to this moment. She was no longer the prisoner. She was the architect of chaos. Harper's plan required a sequence of small, precise actions. First, disable the nearest patrol without alerting the others. Then, slip into the shadows near the hangar, avoiding the cameras she had memorized. Finally, reach the helicopter. Incapacitate the pilot if necessary, and assume control. She executed the first step flawlessly. With a combination of pressure points, leverage, and silent force, she neutralized the unsuspecting guard, dragging him into the shadows to avoid detection. The second step required stealth and timing. Harper moved swiftly, calculated, and deliberate. Every movement, every pause, every breath was synchronized with her mental timeline. The helicopter loomed before her now, engines dormant, rotor blades still. Harper's mind raced through the cockpit layout, recalling sequences for startup, throttle control, and rotor engagement. Every switch had been memorized from observation, every lever anticipated. She approached cautiously, scanning for the pilot. Her eyes locked on him as he adjusted dials and inspected gauges, completely unaware of her presence. Harper's heart beat steadily. Adrenaline sharpened her focus, but did not cloud judgment. Timing was critical. She waited for the precise moment, then struck, using her knowledge of leverage and human psychology to subdue him in seconds. With the pilot incapacitated, Harper moved into the cockpit. Her hands worked quickly, engaging the controls she had. memorized, checking each system with a practiced eye. The engine hummed to life. The rotor began to spin, and the wind picked up, buffeting her against the harness. Below, soldiers began to notice the commotion, shouting alarms that were too late. Harper's execution had been flawless. The first strike had been accomplished. The compound was now in chaos, but she remained composed, her mind calculating next moves, evasive maneuvers, and potential threats. Every second reinforced the advantage she had painstakingly cultivated over weeks of observation and planning. Outside, the desert stretched like a canvas, waiting to be painted with action. Harper lifted the helicopter cautiously, executing a series of evasive maneuvers that drew attention away from her position, while avoiding obstacles on the ground. Her training allowed her to maintain complete control, even under pressure. Enemy. Soldiers fired weapons, attempting to disrupt her liftoff, but she anticipated their movements, using both speed and altitude to avoid harm. The first strike had not only liberated her physically, but also disrupted enemy coordination, sowing confusion and fear. The balance of power had shifted irreversibly. As the helicopter gained altitude, Harper scanned the surrounding area for threats. Vehicles moved haphazardly, alarms blared, and communication radios sputtered with frantic orders. Her mind was a combination of tactical calculation and instinctive reaction. Every maneuver had been rehearsed, every variable anticipated, yet she remained flexible, adjusting to real-time developments. The first strike was more than a physical action. It was a psychological blow. The enemy's confidence, built over weeks of underestimating her, was crumbling. Harper's execution had proven that their assumptions were dangerously flawed. Once at a safe altitude, Harper assessed the next phase. The first strike had been successful, but she knew this was only the beginning. The helicopter was not merely a vehicle for escape. It was a strategic tool, a platform from which she could manipulate, disrupt, and dominate enemy operations. She began planning maneuvers that would maximize chaos among the compound's personnel while ensuring her own safety. Every observation, every detail from weeks of careful study now informed her decisions. Harper had turned a calculated risk into a decisive action, setting the stage for a broader counterattack that would completely upend the enemy's assumptions. As the desert stretched endlessly below, Harper allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. The first strike had been flawless, swift, precise, and psychologically devastating to her captors. Every movement had been executed with purpose, every risk accounted for. Yet she remained vigilant, aware that the enemy would adapt, regroup, and attempt to reclaim control. Harper's mind was already planning the next sequences: evasive maneuvers, strategic disruptions, and further exploitation of enemy weaknesses. The first strike had been the opening act. The true battle, the moment that would turn captivity into domination, was only just beginning. Harper's focus remained absolute. The pilot, unconscious but unharmed, was secured in the co-pilot seat. She monitored the helicopter's instruments, ensuring stability, and charted a course that would give her both mobility and tactical advantage. Below, soldiers scrambled, shouting orders that were too slow, too disorganized. Every second reinforced her advantage. The first strike had been a demonstration of precision, strategy, and psychological dominance. The enemy had assumed weakness. Harper had proven strength. In the quiet hum of the helicopter's rotor, she felt the culmination of weeks of preparation, the first tangible step toward total control and freedom. Harper's heart remained steady, though her senses were heightened to the limit. The helicopter's engines roared beneath her, lifting her above the chaos of the compound. Below, armed guards scrambled, shouting orders in panic, unsure where the threat had originated. Harper's mind, however, remained a calm matrix of observation, calculation, and anticipation. Every detail she had memorized, the position of vehicles, patrol routes, the location of key personnel, guided her actions. She was no longer a prisoner. She was the one in control, and every second in the air reinforced the advantage she had meticulously orchestrated from within her cell. The pilot, still unconscious, was restrained, secured in the co-pilot seat to prevent any interference. Harper had anticipated the possibility of struggle, and her preparations had ensured it would be minimal. She monitored the aircraft's instruments, confirming stability, altitude, and fuel levels. The helicopter was nimble, responding exactly as she expected. Months of observation, mental rehearsal, and preparation converged into this precise moment. Harper felt the hum of the engines through the seat, the vibration through her fingertips, and the wind rushing past the rotor blades. Every sensory input was a signal, every instrument reading a reassurance that her plan was succeeding. She assessed the compound from above. Soldiers were regrouping, moving toward the gates, rifles raised, but their coordination was haphazard, unstructured, and delayed by confusion. Harper's mental map of the terrain allowed her to anticipate their movements and adjust her flight path accordingly. Her strategy was not merely escape, it was domination. By maintaining altitude, speed, and unpredictability, she could control the battlefield from above, dictating enemy movements and amplifying their disarray. The helicopter was no longer just a means of flight. It was a tool of psychological warfare. Harper intended to exploit it fully. Harper began executing the next phase of her plan, positioning the helicopter to maximize visibility and disruption without exposing herself to enemy fire. She circled the compound, observing patterns and responses in real time. Some guards froze, unsure whether to engage, while others fired indiscriminately, hoping to hit a moving target. Harper adjusted altitude, banked sharply to avoid fire, and rotated to keep the rotor blades away from obstacles. Every movement was precise, rehearsed, and calculated. The first strike had been physical. Now, the hijack was psychological. She was showing the enemy that control was no longer theirs. As the helicopter hovered over the main courtyard, Harper identified key targets: the commanding officer coordinating defense, a communications hub, and soldiers attempting to mount vehicles. She made split-second decisions, adjusting her position to prevent organized resistance. The enemy's panic was now palpable. Shouts filled the air, orders clashed, and coordination dissolved into chaos. Harper had anticipated this response. The sight of a single helicopter, piloted by the very prisoner they had underestimated, disoriented and demoralized them. The psychological impact was immediate. They no longer knew where to look, who to follow, or how to respond. Harper had turned fear into advantage. The pilot's unconscious form reminded Harper that she still held an essential human variable in her plan. She monitored him carefully, ensuring that he remained secure but unharmed. His earlier arrogance had been a vulnerability, and now it served as a silent reinforcement of her control. Harper's plan had depended not only on her technical skill, but also on exploiting human psychology, and the pilot was a perfect example. His prior assumptions that she was powerless had been shattered. She allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. Every detail, every subtle manipulation, every observation had led to this decisive moment. Harper's flight path became more aggressive as she executed maneuvers designed to disorient and delay the enemy. Sharp ascents, sudden dips, and controlled rotations forced soldiers to adjust repeatedly, disrupting any attempt at coordinated response. Vehicles were abandoned, radios scrambled, and panic cascaded through the compound. Harper maintained perfect composure, her mind calculating the optimal path, altitude, and speed to maintain advantage while avoiding collision or danger. Every action combined training, observation, and psychological insight. She had transformed captivity into battlefield dominance, leveraging the helicopter as both shield and weapon. She now turned her attention to the next objective, establishing a clear escape corridor. The surrounding terrain was rugged, dotted with sand dunes, rocky outcrops, and narrow passes. Harper had memorized these features from her previous reconnaissance. Mentally mapping routes that offered both concealment and speed, the helicopter responded flawlessly to her commands. She maneuvered through a narrow canyon, the rotor brushing past rock faces, every move precise, controlled, and deliberate. Her training allowed her to convert potential hazards into tactical advantages, using the environment to further disorient any pursuing forces. From above, Harper noticed additional weaknesses in enemy coordination. Guards were regrouping too. Slowly, vehicles were poorly positioned, and key personnel were vulnerable. She decided to exploit this by simulating an attack on the main communications hub, drawing attention away from her true escape path. The helicopter hovered just high, enough to remain out of reach while she used shadows and terrain to maintain visual advantage. Soldiers below panicked, thinking she intended direct assault. Harper had turned observation and strategy into leverage, using perception itself as a tool of domination. Time became critical. Harper's fuel calculations, environmental variables, and enemy responses required constant adjustment. She maintained altitude and speed to maximize safety while avoiding predictable flight paths. Each maneuver was deliberate, precise, and synchronized with the chaos unfolding below. The enemy, overwhelmed and disoriented, struggled to mount any coherent defense. Harper's hijack had become an aerial chess game, her movements dictating their reactions, her control absolute. She was no longer merely escaping. She was rewriting the rules of engagement. Suddenly, an armed vehicle attempted to pursue her. Harper banked sharply, dipping behind a sand dune to mask her trajectory. She adjusted rotor speed to generate a sudden downdraft, scattering loose debris and creating confusion. The vehicle swerved, losing control temporarily. Harper monitored the unfolding chaos, making mental notes of how environmental factors amplified her advantage. Every detail had been anticipated. Every action had been rehearsed. The hijack was not merely flight, it was a controlled campaign of disruption, leveraging skill, observation, and psychological insight against the enemy. Harper's focus remained absolute. Her mind alternated between technical precision and tactical foresight. She anticipated potential reinforcements, environmental hazards, and mechanical variables, adjusting in real time to maintain advantage. The pilot remained subdued, a reminder of her earlier leverage and the ongoing effectiveness of observation and strategy. Harper's plan was no longer theoretical. It was fully operational. Every calculated risk, every rehearsed maneuver, and every exploited vulnerability culminated in this execution. The enemy had underestimated her, and the consequences were now visible below. With a sharp ascent, Harper cleared the immediate threat of the compound, creating a temporary buffer zone. Below, soldiers continued to scramble, their coordination broken, their morale shattered. She allowed herself a brief, controlled moment of satisfaction. The helicopter, once a symbol of enemy control, was now an instrument of her dominance. Every second in the air reinforced her advantage. She had transformed captivity into freedom and observation into weaponized insight. Harper's hijack was more than physical. It was the manifestation of intellect, training, and psychological strategy. Finally, Harper set a course toward the distant terrain she had scouted mentally. Rugged canyons, hidden valleys, and unobserved paths offered a route that would delay pursuit while maximizing concealment. The pilot remained unconscious, but unharmed, restrained as Harper monitored instruments, adjusting altitude, speed, and trajectory with surgical precision. Every maneuver, every calculation, and every decision reinforced control. She had seized the helicopter, turned the enemy's assets against them, and created an irreversible advantage. Her first strike had evolved into a full hijack, and she now held complete command of the battlefield from above. As the desert stretched beneath her, Harper felt the culmination of weeks of observation, deception, and meticulous planning. Every moment in captivity had contributed to this triumph. Every mistake of her captors had been exploited, and every variable had been anticipated. The helicopter, engines humming and rotor spinning, was no longer merely a vehicle. It was the embodiment of her intelligence, patience, and audacity. Harper had turned weakness into strategy, captivity into empowerment, and expectation into complete surprise. The hijack was complete, but her mission was far from over. The desert below was a chaotic landscape of confusion, disarray, and falter in authority. From her perch in the helicopter, Harper observed every movement with a tactical eye. Vehicles swerved erratically, guards shouted orders that went unanswered, and communications crackled with fragmented attempts at coordination. Each disorganized action confirmed her predictions. The enemy had underestimated her, relied too heavily on routine, and overvalued their assumed dominance. Harper, meanwhile, maintained absolute control over the situation, the helicopter's engines humming beneath her as she navigated a complex aerial battlefield with precision and foresight. Her mind worked in layers technical, tactical, psychological. Every maneuver she executed was calculated to amplify the chaos below while minimizing personal risk. She dipped low to mask her trajectory from distant observation posts, then ascended to gain visual advantage over patrol routes. Soldiers on the ground were unsure whether to advance, retreat, or take cover. Every second of hesitation worked in Harper's favor. She had transformed the helicopter into more than a vehicle. It was now a platform of strategic superiority, a mobile command post that allowed her to dictate enemy actions without exposing herself to danger. Harper surveyed the compound from above, noting weak points that could be exploited to further disrupt coordination. She identified the communications hub, now mostly abandoned, and realized that cutting off this node could amplify confusion exponentially. With careful precision, she maneuvered the helicopter closer, low enough to distract, but high enough to remain untouchable. Soldiers on the ground fired indiscriminately, bullets whistling past her, yet she remained calm, her eyes fixed on the patterns she had memorized. Every movement, every environmental factor, every enemy reaction had been anticipated. Harper had become the embodiment of control, turning observation into weaponized intelligence. She deployed a series of subtle maneuvers, using rotor wash to create dust clouds that obscured visibility. Vehicles lost traction, soldiers stumbled, and panic spread like wildfire. Harper had studied this effect in her mental simulations. Environmental manipulation could be as effective as direct confrontation. From above, she watched the enemies. Structured routines dissolve into improvisation, and she knew her advantage was absolute. Even the most disciplined soldiers were now reacting purely instinctively, allowing her to dictate the battlefield with a combination of skill, psychological pressure, and environmental control. Next, Harper targeted the commanding officer attempting to rally forces near the center of the compound. Using the helicopter's shadow and sudden altitude changes, she created the illusion of a moving threat, drawing attention away from her real trajectory. The officer's attention faltered, orders became erratic, and subordinate guards hesitated. Harper's mastery of perception manipulation was becoming evident. She could control enemy reactions without firing a single weapon. The first strike had been physical. The hijack had been operational. Now her actions were psychological, disorienting. and dismantling the enemy's command structure from above. She executed a precise low sweep over the main courtyard, simulating aggressive intent while maintaining a safe altitude. Soldiers dove for cover. Vehicles collided in frantic maneuvers, and communication lines were overwhelmed with confused reports. Harper's mind processed the chaos analytically. Who was reacting correctly? Who was panicking? And which vulnerabilities could be exploited next? Every movement was designed to consolidate her advantage, weaken enemy cohesion, and ensure that any attempt at organized counterattack would be delayed or neutralized. Harper's control over the battlefield was near total. The pilot remained unconscious, but secured in the co-pilot's seat. Harper glanced at him briefly, noting that his previous arrogance had become a silent reinforcement of her psychological strategy. Every assumption he had made about her weakness had been shattered. Now, he was a living testament to the consequences of underestimating her. Harper maintained his security while focusing on broader objectives, disrupting reinforcements, manipulating enemy perception, and maintaining absolute control of the helicopter's capabilities. Every second in the air further solidified her. Advantage. Harper now considered the broader terrain surrounding the compound. Distant ridges offered natural cover for advancing units, while open areas created exposure for any response teams. She used this knowledge to manipulate enemy movement, guiding them inadvertently into disadvantageous positions. By varying altitude, speed, and angle of approach, Harper forced soldiers to make decisions in panic, often contradictory or self-defeating. Her ability to synthesize observation, psychological insight, and technical skill allowed her to dominate both the aerial and ground dimensions of the battlefield simultaneously. She then executed a calculated sweep around the perimeter of the compound, forcing vehicles and personnel to reveal positions and inadvertently isolate themselves. Guards, attempting to regroup, were now funneled into predictable pathways she had pre-identified, creating opportunities for controlled engagement if necessary. Harper's plan relied not on brute force, but on precision, anticipation, and the exploitation of predictable human behavior. Her knowledge of the enemy's routines and errors allowed her to choreograph chaos with a level of control few could achieve. She was a ghost orchestrating destruction from above. Next, Harper identified a secondary communications hub being reactivated by remaining personnel. Interfering with it was crucial to ensuring prolonged confusion. Using the helicopter's presence to draw attention, she simulated aggressive low passes and rotor sweeps while maintaining a safe distance. Soldiers misread the maneuver as a targeted assault, abandoning their positions to protect key assets. Harper's aerial maneuvers had become a form of psychological warfare, turning enemy initiative into reactionary chaos. Her understanding of perception, timing, and environmental impact had transformed the helicopter into an instrument of tactical superiority. Beyond mere mobility, she calculated her next steps carefully. Reinforcements from nearby outposts would likely respond in predictable patterns. Harper adjusted altitude and speed to monitor potential approaches, ready to manipulate and delay them if necessary. Every maneuver was synchronized with ongoing chaos below, debris from rotor wash, dust clouds obscuring line of sight, and psychological disorientation among soldiers. Harper's ability to integrate technical skill, observation, and strategy ensured that she remained in control, turning every enemy action into an opportunity rather than a threat. As the chaos unfolded, Harper reflected on the precision required for this stage of the operation. Months of observation had culminated in a moment of dynamic control where every variable was known, every reaction anticipated, and every maneuver rehearsed. Even the unpredictability of human panic could be managed with careful timing and environmental manipulation. Harper's patience, intelligence, and foresight had transformed a simple hijack into a campaign of strategic dominance, and the desert below was now a canvas for her orchestrated control. The pilot began to regain consciousness, his eyes widening at the scene below. Harper's presence, calm and commanding, reinforced his realization. He had been completely outmaneuvered. He offered no resistance, understanding the futility. Harper's strategy had accounted for every possible reaction, and even his prior. Arrogance could not withstand the orchestration of observation, deception, and calculated action. The enemy's underestimation had been their downfall, and the consequences were now visible from every direction. Harper had become the dominant force, airborne and untouchable. Finally, Harper plotted a path away from the immediate threat zone, toward natural cover and terrain advantageous for evasion. The helicopter responded perfectly to her commands. Every adjustment precise, every movement deliberate. Soldiers below attempted to organize, but Harper's manipulations had dismantled their ability to respond effectively. The psychological impact of her presence from above compounded their physical disadvantage. Every second reinforced her superiority. Harper had not only survived, she had dominated, exploited weaknesses, and maintained absolute control over a situation that had initially seemed hopeless. As the desert stretched endlessly below, Harper allowed herself a moment to assess the unfolding scenario. The enemy, disorganized and demoralized, was no longer capable of immediate retaliation. Her first strike, hijack, and aerial manipulation had completely unbalanced their operations. She had turned captivity into command, observation into weaponized insight, and fear into advantage. Harper's control was total, her escape assured, but she remained vigilant. The next phase of her plan, securing complete freedom and neutralizing remaining threats, required the same precision, focus, and tactical acumen that had brought her this far. Harper's eyes scanned the horizon. The desert, wide and unpredictable, would become her ally. Elevation changes, hidden valleys, and natural cover offered opportunities for evasion and further manipulation. From above, she could anticipate enemy movements, redirect responses, and consolidate her advantage. Every variable had been considered, every reaction anticipated. Harper had transformed a single act of hijack into a fully executed campaign of disruption and psychological dominance. She was no longer a prisoner. She was the orchestrator of total control. The desert below had become a chessboard, and Harper held all the pieces. From her vantage point in the helicopter, she could see the scattered remnants of the enemy's once organized defense. Vehicles overturned, guards immobilized by panic, and communications disrupted. Each was a direct consequence of her meticulous planning, patient observation, and precise execution. But Harper knew this was only the beginning. To truly turn the tables, she needed to convert chaos into opportunity, exploiting every weakness she had discovered while maintaining absolute control. Her first move was to leverage her altitude and mobility to direct enemy movements. Harper identified pockets of remaining resistance, attempting to regroup near makeshift barricades. Using sudden descents and aggressive banking maneuvers, she created the impression of multiple threats, forcing soldiers to expose themselves in predictable patterns. From above, she cataloged each position, timing, and vulnerability. Harper's observations allowed her to dictate the flow of engagement without ever firing a shot. Every soldier below was reacting to her presence, unknowingly following the path she had orchestrated. The pilot, still restrained in the co-pilot seat, watched silently. Harper's calm confidence was a stark contrast to the panic unfolding beneath them. His earlier arrogance had blinded him to her capabilities, and now he witnessed the consequences of underestimation. Harper did not need to explain her strategy. The unfolding scene spoke volumes. The enemy's reliance on routine, overconfidence, and assumptions had been their undoing, and Harper had exploited each flaw systematically. From prisoner to master of the battlefield, she had flipped the narrative entirely. Harper then focused on the compound's remaining high-value targets. She had memorized their locations and routines, and the chaos she had created forced them into exposed positions. Using the helicopter's noise, rotor wash, and shadow, she manipulated enemy movements, her presence creating uncertainty and fear. Soldiers attempted to flee or regroup, but were funneled precisely into paths she had predicted. Her understanding of psychology allowed her to anticipate reactions before they occurred, giving her a nearly supernatural advantage. Every maneuver reinforced her control and turned hesitation into tactical leverage. Next, Harper considered the surrounding environment beyond the immediate compound. Desert ridges, hidden valleys, and rocky terrain could conceal advancing reinforcements. She adjusted altitude to gain maximum visibility, plotting intercept paths to delay or misdirect any approaching forces. Harper's awareness of topography and environmental effects transformed the helicopter into a strategic command post. Each flight path she selected was designed to exploit both the terrain and enemy behavior, creating layers of advantage that reinforced her dominance. Even in open air, she was untouchable. Harper then executed a daring low sweep over a key checkpoint where a group of soldiers had regrouped. The rotor wash kicked up clouds of sand, obscuring vision and causing disarray. Vehicles skidded, guards stumbled, and coordination dissolved. Harper had anticipated this effect. Environmental manipulation magnified psychological impact. Below, soldiers froze or miscalculated, leaving themselves exposed. The helicopter had become both shield and weapon, allowing Harper to direct operations, disrupt enemy actions, and control the battlefield without direct engagement. Her intellectual mastery had translated into kinetic dominance. The pilot, still restrained, observed in stunned silence. Harper's execution of strategy, from flight maneuvers to psychological manipulation, left no doubt that she was no longer the captive, but the orchestrator of the enemy's downfall. Every misstep by the soldiers below reinforced the consequences. Of underestimation, every delayed response amplified her advantage. Harper's control extended beyond the mechanical. It was psychological, tactical, and environmental, all converging to create total dominance. The balance of power had shifted irreversibly. Harper's next target was the communications hub. It remained partially operational, threatening to restore some coordination among the remaining enemy forces. Using altitude and movement, she simulated targeted passes to draw attention away from her real objective. Soldiers abandoned positions to defend the hub, inadvertently isolating themselves from each other and exposing vulnerabilities. Harper capitalized on every reaction, creating a cascading effect of confusion. By controlling perception, she transformed chaos into a tactical tool, ensuring that the enemy could no longer regain cohesion or control. She then maneuvered the helicopter to gain advantage over the compound's high ground. From above, she identified previously hidden soldiers attempting flanking maneuvers. Harper adjusted her position, using shadows, speed, and rotor wash to disrupt their advance. Panic spread through the ranks as coordinated movements collapsed. Harper's presence had become an invisible hand, directing, manipulating, and controlling every action below. Every calculated adjustment reinforced her superiority, turning every attempted maneuver by the enemy into a response she had already anticipated. Harper's mind remained analytical even in the chaos. She monitored fuel levels, altitude, and engine performance while simultaneously tracking enemy behavior. Every variable was accounted for, every contingency rehearsed. She integrated observation, tactical calculation, and psychological insight into a seamless strategy. The enemy's initial assumption that she was powerless had been completely dismantled. Harper had turned captivity into control, fear into advantage, and observation into domination. Her aerial command was not just survival. It was strategic. Mastery. As the hours passed, Harper continued to expand her control. She directed enemy forces inadvertently into disadvantageous positions while securing routes for her eventual escape. The helicopter allowed her to move freely, survey the battlefield, and maintain initiative. Every action, from subtle altitude changes to rapid directional shifts, disrupted enemy cohesion. Harper's ability to synthesize observation, psychology, and technical skill had created a self-reinforcing cycle. Panic amplified disarray. Disarray created opportunity, and opportunity reinforced dominance. Finally, Harper executed a controlled sweep along the perimeter to eliminate any remaining pockets of resistance. She maintained safe altitude while creating the illusion of multiple threats through precise maneuvering. Soldiers misinterpreted her movements, leaving positions vulnerable and isolated. The helicopter's presence dominated the battlefield, dictating every reaction. Harper had turned the tables entirely. The hunters had become the hunted, and the previously structured. Enemy forces were now reacting to a force they could neither predict nor confront effectively. She allowed herself a brief reflection as she maneuvered over the desert terrain. Months of careful observation, strategic planning, and psychological manipulation had culminated in this moment. Every detail from memorizing patrols to exploiting environmental conditions had contributed to her complete reversal of fortune. Harper had transformed weakness into strategy, captivity into empowerment, and a single helicopter into an instrument of command. The battlefield beneath her was a testament to intelligence, patience, and audacity, and the enemy's downfall was now inevitable. Harper's eyes scanned the horizon for approaching reinforcements. She anticipated movement from distant outposts and adjusted her flight path to maximize reaction time while maintaining control. Every potential threat was accounted for, every possible variable incorporated into her calculations. The desert, once a mere backdrop, had become a strategic tool. Harper's mastery of terrain, psychology, and mechanical skill ensured that, even if new forces arrived, she could manipulate and control the response. Her dominance was now near total. She began plotting her exit, carefully selecting a route that maximized cover while maintaining speed. Rugged terrain provided natural concealment for potential retreat, while elevated vantage points allowed continued observation of enemy movements. Harper's strategy combined evasion with psychological manipulation. Even in withdrawal, she remained a commanding presence, dictating the enemy's actions and reactions. Every detail had been rehearsed and calculated. Every movement contributed to the consolidation of control. She had become not only a survivor, but a strategist, a master of battlefield dynamics. Harper reflected on the transformation she had undergone. From prisoner to pilot, observer to commander, each step of her journey had been deliberate, calculated, and precise. Her actions had demonstrated that intelligence, patience, and psychological insight could overcome physical confinement and numerical disadvantage. The enemy's reliance on routine, overconfidence, and underestimation had been exploited at every stage. Harper had not only survived, she had dominated. Every maneuver, every calculation, and every subtle psychological cue had culminated in a total reversal of power. As she flew toward her final escape route, Harper maintained vigilance. She knew that while immediate danger had been neutralized, residual threats remained. The helicopter allowed mobility, observation, and continued control. Harper's strategy extended beyond the immediate battlefield. She was creating conditions for complete freedom, while consolidating the chaos she had orchestrated. The desert below, once a symbol of confinement, now served as a vast arena for her mastery. Harper had fully turned the tables, and nothing below could challenge her authority. The sun had climbed high over the desert, casting harsh shadows across the terrain, yet Harper's focus remained unshakable. From her vantage point in the helicopter, she surveyed the fractured remnants of the enemy's once formidable compound. The chaos below was no accident. It was the direct result of her meticulous planning, precise execution, and unflinching resolve. Each maneuver, each calculated disruption, had been a step toward freedom, and now the final phase of her escape was at hand. Harper had not only survived, she was about to redefine the boundaries of possibility. She began by charting a route through the desert's natural obstacles. Rugged canyons, narrow passes, and hidden valleys offered both cover and strategic advantage. Harper adjusted altitude and speed to maximize concealment while maintaining control of the helicopter. Every detail mattered. Wind currents, rotor-wash effects on sand and debris, and potential observation points by enemy forces. She had memorized these features from weeks of careful study, and now each element contributed to the culmination of her plan. Harper was no longer reacting. She was orchestrating, turning every environmental factor into an ally. Below, the enemy struggled to regroup. Vehicles had overturned, soldiers were disoriented, and communication networks were fractured. Harper's prior actions had shattered their coordination, leaving them vulnerable to miscalculation and error. She allowed herself a brief, controlled smile. The landscape below was a testament to her intelligence and perseverance. But she remained. Vigilant freedom was not guaranteed until she had fully crossed the thresholds of safety. Every moment required precision, foresight, and adaptability. Harper had become the embodiment of strategic mastery, her actions a seamless blend of intellect, observation, and daring. Harper's eyes scanned the horizon for distant reinforcements. She anticipated likely routes and times of arrival, planning maneuvers to misdirect or delay any pursuing forces. The helicopter's mobility gave her unparalleled advantage, allowing her to strike fear and uncertainty into enemies she never needed to confront directly. Every movement she executed above the desert was both defensive and strategic, shaping the battlefield to her advantage. Harper's ability to integrate aerial control with psychological manipulation had transformed her escape into a campaign of tactical dominance. As she navigated the canyon passes, Harper executed a series of controlled maneuvers to ensure no enemy vehicle could follow. Sharp turns, sudden ascents, and precise dips in altitude created visual and navigational confusion. The rugged terrain, once a potential hazard, now became her ally. Dust clouds obscured sight lines, cliffs and ridges masked approach angles, and natural valleys provided temporary cover. Harper's intimate understanding of the desert had turned it from a barrier into a tool of liberation. Every detail she had studied and memorized contributed to the perfect orchestration of her flight. The pilot, still restrained, but now regaining some consciousness, looked around in awe. Harper's composure, precision, and intelligence left. No doubt, she had transformed from prisoner into master of the battlefield. The realization was quiet but profound. Every assumption he had made about her weakness had been obliterated, and the consequences were undeniable. Harper did not gloat. She simply maintained focus, ensuring the continued success of her escape. Every second, every maneuver, reinforced her control and advanced her toward ultimate freedom. Harper's escape route required navigation through a narrow canyon that funneled potential pursuers into a predictable path. She anticipated enemy reconnaissance attempts and adjusted altitude to remain undetectable while maintaining a clear line of sight on the terrain below. Every adjustment was precise, calculated, and deliberate. Harper's ability to combine environmental awareness, tactical foresight, and technical skill allowed her to maintain initiative in a situation where any error could prove fatal. Her mastery of observation and strategy had turned the desert into a controlled theater of operations. As she emerged from the canyon, the open desert stretched endlessly ahead. Harper accelerated, maximizing speed while maintaining control, and scanned for distant threats. She had created a mental map of every possible approach route, every hidden obstacle, and every potential danger. The helicopter responded flawlessly to her commands, translating her strategic vision into precise action. Harper's control over both machine and environment ensured that even the open expanse did not compromise her advantage. Every movement, every decision, reinforced her path toward unchallenged freedom. Harper's mind turned to the final stage, reaching safety beyond the enemy's operational reach. She had identified a remote landing zone, hidden from observation, with natural barriers that would make pursuit difficult. Every step had been rehearsed mentally, every variable accounted for. Harper's plan had relied not just on physical skill, but on patience, intelligence, and the exploitation of human error. Now, as she approached the designated zone, her meticulous preparation reached its ultimate test. The helicopter hummed steadily beneath her, responsive to every input, a perfect instrument of liberation. Below, scattered enemy units attempted to reorganize, but Harper's prior disruptions had rendered them ineffective. Vehicles stalled, soldiers hesitated, and communication lines failed to transmit coherent orders. Her strategic dominance from the air ensured that no coordinated counterattack could succeed. Harper's earlier actions, first strike, hijack, psychological manipulation, had compounded into an irreversible advantage. The enemy, disoriented and fragmented, could no longer pose a credible threat. Harper had turned captivity into a campaign of control, and now the final escape was within reach. Harper approached the hidden landing zone with calculated caution. She descended gradually, scanning for obstacles and ensuring the rotor wash did not stir debris that could compromise her position. The terrain was rugged but manageable, with natural cover offering protection and concealment. Harper executed a flawless touchdown, bringing the helicopter to a smooth stop. She secured the aircraft, checked instruments, and ensured the pilot remained restrained but unharmed. Every detail, every precaution, had been considered to prevent any chance of compromise during the final moments of escape. As she disembarked from the helicopter, the desert wind brushed against her face. The remote landscape, quiet except for the hum of the helicopter's engines, felt like liberation incarnate. Harper allowed herself a moment to breathe, to acknowledge the culmination of her efforts. Months of observation, preparation, and calculated risk had led to this instant. She was no longer a prisoner, no longer at the mercy of enemy assumptions. Harper had transformed adversity into advantage, weakness into strength, and expectation into triumph. The pilot, now fully conscious, remained silent, an unspoken witness to her extraordinary skill and resilience. Harper's mastery had been total. She had neutralized threats, manipulated perception, and leveraged both terrain and machine to achieve her objectives. Every second had been calculated, every risk mitigated, every outcome anticipated. Harper's escape was complete, and her transformation from captive to victor was absolute. The desert, once a site of potential danger, now symbolized freedom, strategy, and triumph. Harper moved away from the helicopter, scanning the horizon for any residual threats. None appeared. The enemy, scattered and demoralized, had no capacity to challenge her now. Harper's meticulous preparation and precise execution had ensured complete control over every variable. The psychological impact of her actions would resonate long after her departure, a testament to the power of intelligence, patience, and audacity. Harper's journey from confinement to command was complete, and the desert around her was a silent witness to her victory. She paused briefly, allowing herself a final reflection on the magnitude of what she had achieved. Every detail her observation of enemy routines, the mental rehearsals in confinement, the exploitation of psychological weaknesses, the mastery of the helicopter had converged into a flawless execution. Harper's actions demonstrated that intellect, courage, and strategic insight could overcome physical constraints, numerical disadvantage, and the expectations of those who sought to dominate her. She had achieved not only freedom but mastery over circumstance itself. Finally, Harper began moving toward safety, following the planned route that would ensure her continued security. Each step was deliberate, each decision informed by observation and foresight. She was no longer reacting to events. She was dictating the outcome of her circumstances. The desert stretched endlessly ahead, a canvas of freedom, possibility, and triumph. Harper's journey, marked by ingenuity, resilience, and audacity, had reached its culmination. She had turned captivity into command, fear into advantage, and expectation into victory. As the horizon glowed with the fading light of afternoon, Harper looked back one final time. The compound, now a chaotic tableau of disorder and defeat, stood as a silent testament to her skill. The helicopter, once a symbol of enemy control, had become the instrument of her liberation. Harper's transformation, from prisoner to strategist, from captive to commander, was complete. She moved forward with unwavering confidence, knowing that she had not only survived, but triumphed, having reshaped the battlefield and her destiny entirely.